Senator? Well, the good Republican mayor Claus come celebrate. Where is that picture of you and your family?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we'll get started here. We've got one more special guest that may arrive a little bit late. If they do, we'll work them in. Here he comes now. We'll wait till Congressman Green gets seated. we just want to start this 100th celebration of the first woman that voted in the state of Tennessee, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson. We all know her here locally as Aunt Cord, and as the mayor of Benton County, I want to thank everyone for being here, being part of this 100-year celebration. On this very day, April 22nd, 1919, she walked up to this courthouse and she cast her very first vote as a woman in Tennessee. So we in Benton County would like to celebrate that moment, and it's a great moment for women's history as well, but most especially a great moment for Benton County, Tennessee. So and before we get started, the program may adjust a little bit. I know it's going to get hot, so you've got a lot of politicians in the crowd. We'll try not to increase the temperature of the air any as well, so hopefully we'll have a good breeze. But again, welcome on behalf of Benton County. Thank you for being here for this moment. We're proud of this moment. Before we get started with the prayers and the pledge, I just want to make special mention to these markers that sit to the left of this podium to your right. Of course, we've got the renowned Mary Beasley Hudson here, but to the far left, we also have Thomas C. Wright. He was the governor during the time and promoted women's history or women's suffrage. He was a big proponent of women being able to vote in the state of Tennessee, but we're also proud that he's a Benton County boy. So all of this pretty much happened on his watch. Further left of his marker is, I'm proud to say, is my grandmother, who was Tennessee's first woman elected to the state senate for an official term. Again, a proud moment for Benton County. And in just 8 miles, by the way the crow flies, a woman by the name of Hattie Wyatt Caraway grew up in the town of Husberg. She went on later to become the very first woman U.S. senator in our nation's history. So basically within an 8-mile radius of here, we've got a lot to celebrate and a lot to be proud of as Benton Countyans. So I will turn to Miss Sylvia Newman at this time. She's the pastor at Towels Chapel First Methodist Church. She will lead our invocation.
Good morning. I'm one of those pastors that you can speak to me, you can amen me, you can shout hallelujah and all that good stuff. Amen? Come on, let's roll. It's a great day in the neighborhood. I am really thankful and honored to be here to pray over you and to pray over Camden and our county and our United States of America. Amen? Amen. So I need you to join with me together and let's pray and rejoice in this day. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Father, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory. In the name of Jesus. Amen? Amen. Well, you know what? I want to continue and lift you up because as a pastor and as a woman, it is very important to me to encourage each other, not just because I'm a woman, but we are all children of God. And we all come together to celebrate and encourage each other. And today we honor a wonderful woman, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson, in her historic vote here in Benton County. And so I just want to rejoice with you, and I want to thank God what a wonderful and awesome woman she was. So with that, I want to share her heart with you because she was a wonderful woman, a citizen of the United States of America, and a citizen of heaven. And I believe that this awesome lady walked by faith and not by sight. And I just want to thank the Father, our Heavenly Father, for walking beside her And then all of us here today to unite as people, as His beloved. I thank God for all of today's and for the tomorrows to come, to bless and honor her as we stand here together in unity, and to thank Him for leading all of us as women. We encourage each other, we love each other, and we adore the Lord God Almighty. And so with that, I just want to bless you. I want to bless this union here. I want to bless all of you here that are with us together as we hold on to the faith that God has engraved and hardwired into all of our bodies, in our hearts, and in our spirits. We thank you, Jesus. We love and honor you always. Be sweet and always love Jesus. And all the God's people say, Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
At this time, I'll recognize a great veteran of the community. She's very active in veterans issues in the community as well. Miss Diane Goodson will lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
For God and country, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Diane. She's a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Next up is Miss Haley Flowers, who will lead us in the national anthem.
Please rise and remove your caps.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Also, I want to recognize our Aunt Cord for this event, Miss Julie Hessen over here. For all she's done, she works with the Benton County Genealogical Society a lot, does a lot of historical, I guess you can say, activities within our community. We're thankful that she chose to give us this opportunity to dress up as Aunt Cord. I think she makes a great one. And so if you want your picture made, there she is. She'll stay there throughout the tenure of this event for you to have some pictures made with her if you would like. So at this time, with our schedules, we got a lot of activity going on both in Washington and in Nashville. I wanted to be respectful to our elected officials who have both served in those locations. They may, I guess I'll apologize in advance if one or two or all may have to step out a little early from this event, but it's basically based on their demanding schedules that they have and places that they've got to be. So we're going to start the program by recognizing our elected officials first, let them give some commentary and a few little proclamations that we have up here, and we'll leave that up to our U.S. Senator Blackburn, who is our keynote speaker. Before I get to that moment, though, I want to recognize our city mayor, Mr. Roger Pafford. Ann Cord voted in a city election, so I'd like to give him this opportunity to make some remarks.
Thanks, Brett. Welcome to Camden. Glad y'all are here. To me, this is a special event, and it's a privilege and an honor to be able to vote. And when we take that away from us, we won't ever be the same again. So it's really good that we're voters. It's good that Ann Cord had the courage to come up here and vote. Being the first woman, it's an honor for us, our city and our county, to have that happen, because really it's changed history. And I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm glad y'all are here, and appreciate it. Thank you.
I've also often made the comment that 2020 is just around the corner, is it not? And I believe that all these elected officials very much wants the women vote to be very supportive of them. So it's again, we're going to see a lot of history coming on in the next year and a half. So it's an exciting time to experience this. So at this time, I'm going to recognize our state representative and our state senator, Senator John Stevens and Representative Bruce Griffey. They will read a proclamation on something that they've been able to do for us here in this town. So at this time, I'll turn the mic over to them.
Thank you, Mayor. And we were sitting here talking, if we're going to just swap out paragraphs, we can do it however you want to do it. I'll start out. A resolution to recognize and honor Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson posthumously, on being the first woman to vote in Tennessee. Whereas it is fitting that the members of this General Assembly should pause to specially remember those past pioneers of our state who, through relentless courage, faith, and devotion, helped to improve the quality of life for their fellow citizens and for the future generations of our country.
Whereas Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson of Benton County was one such estimable pioneer who holds the distinct honor of being the first woman to vote in Tennessee. And
whereas on April 22nd, 1919, a mayoral election was held in Camden, during which Mrs. Hudson, a renowned advocate of women's rights, made sure to be the first woman in line and consequently the first woman to vote in the state of Tennessee. And
whereas the federal amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which allowed women to vote, did not occur until the following year. And
whereas Benton County native Thomas C. Rye had been the previous governor of Tennessee, during his term, he had made an impassioned plea to the 34th General Assembly to pass an amendment to the state constitution and allow women's suffrage. The Constitution of Tennessee prohibited women from voting, but it was determined that the General Assembly could pass a limited act without violating the state constitution. And
whereas on April 15, 1919, the General Assembly passed a limited Women's Suffrage Act by applying to the state and local elections, and newly elected Governor Albert H. Roberts signed the bill 2 days later. And
whereas on April 22nd, 1919, Mrs. Hudson was finally able to realize the success of her many years of hard-fought advocacy for women's rights by voting in the local election for mayor of Camden. It was reported that she voted for the winner of that election.
And whereas a public-spirited citizen of the highest order, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson was wholly committed to the noble cause of women's suffrage, and she should be especially recognized now, therefore.
Be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 111th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the Senate concurring, that we hereby honor Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson posthumously for being the first woman to vote in Tennessee and for her many contributions to Benton County in this state, as we reflect fondly upon her impeccable character and her stalwart commitment to living the examined life with courage and conviction.
May I say one other word? And I having two daughters, but not just because I have two daughters, but doesn't it give your heart swell with pride that in America we have leaders that are women, senators that are women, mayors that are women, and they get to vote because America is all of us together. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank both Mayor Beasley, Mayor Padford, the Chamber of Commerce of Benton County for helping put this event on. I also wanted to recognize in the audience, in the crowd here, one of Miss Beasley's family members, one of her descendants, Mayor B.W. Beasley, Mayor of Milan, Tennessee, is out here. Mayor, you'll stay high. But he is a direct descendant as well. And I have two daughters, so again, like Representative Griffey mentioned, having two daughters and a wife who also get to participate is important. One of my daughters is going up to be a freshman in high school next year, and this seems trivial, but it kind of was important to her, and it illustrates the point. They wanted to vote on who could pick a t-shirt they were going to have, and they couldn't decide, or they had different choices how they were going to have a different t-shirt, and so we decided, why don't you put it up for a vote? And you know, she started talking about it and thinking through how unfair it would be if certain people couldn't vote to decide something so silly as a t-shirt. But still, the importance of that vote, the importance of being able to have a voice heard, to be a citizen recognized of equal standing in the United States is so important. And I just thank who we're honoring today and those who came before us for being courageous in fighting for that opportunity for equal treatment for all Americans. And I just appreciate all of our veterans here today, each of them and their family members who have fought to preserve that and sacrificed so much. Thank you.
Again, another reason to be proud as a Benton County, and we have two great representatives in our House of Representatives and our state Senate, so we're very grateful for their service to our county. And it's still in the works, but they are also working on a resolution to name the state highway from where basically where Aunt Cord lived all the way down to 641 intersection, and it will be called Aunt Cord's Way. So I kind of love that determined labeling there. Okay, our next guest will be Congressman David Kustoff. He represents a portion of Benton County in the north part of our county. He has served in the U.S. Congress many years, multiple terms, and I'm going to turn this podium over for him for some comments.
Mayor, thank you very much. And this is 6 or 7 months on the job for you. Thank you for the job that you're doing. We appreciate it very much. Appreciate your service. Mayor Beasley, I'm glad to see you here. If I can also recognize somebody who's here who drove in from Nashville. He is the chairman of the Tennessee Republican Party, Scott Golden. Scott, would you please stand up? Thank you very much. Thank you for the job that you do. You know, none of us who are here today can remember back 100 years ago before women had the right to vote. And it's incredible. It's incredible to think that history started. We have the greatest democracy in the world here in the United States. We lead the way for the rest of the world. And we demonstrated to the world in 1919, right here in Benton County, that women should indeed have the right to vote. It's amazing. It's 100 years. But it's also amazing to think in Benton County, right here, that we made history that resonated not only here in the United States, but around the world. And as Representative Griffey and Senator Stevens talked about their daughters, I've been thinking all weekend about my 13-year-old daughter. My wife, Roberta, and I, we've got a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. She'll never know the world any different than having the right to vote. And frankly, thanks to trailblazers like Senator Blackburn, she'll never know that women can't serve in the highest office in the land. It's amazing that 99 years later, we have the first female senator from the state of Tennessee in Marsha Blackburn. Isn't that incredible? But we demonstrated right here in Benton County, to Benton County, and to the state of Tennessee, and to the United States, the importance and the significance of women having the right to vote. I think of how hard our ancestors and predecessors like Aunt Cord had to fight for us to enjoy that right. And I think I speak for all of you when I say it couldn't be more to all of us. I appreciate the significance of what Aunt Cord did. I appreciate the historical significance of what Benton County did. And ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to represent all of you. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
And a little piece of history, I know that Aunt Cord wanted to place her vote for Mr. A.V. Boyle of yes. And he always took the recognition that he was the first man to have a vote by a woman. So I guess there's always a political spin in there somewhere. So it's and I know Congressman Kusoff, I guess it has been the completion of 7 months. Sometimes it seems like 7 years in the world of politics. But I did not want to disrespect Congressman Kusoff. He is the senior congressman of this county. But I saved Congressman Green for next. And the reason I did that was because he followed in some big footsteps. We know he took the seat that was formerly held by Congressman Marsha Blackburn, who was a first of many. I would think that she was probably the first female representative, first female state senator as well from her district. But we've saved something out special for her later on. So at this time, I'm going to recognize someone I'm proud to call my friend, a personal friend, and I've gotten to watch him and know him over the years. He is a great veteran of our U.S. military, a fellow comrade in arms there, and he was recently elected to the 7th congressional seat representing most of Benton County. And at this time, I would like to recognize Dr. Mark Green.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for seeing how important this day is, and for putting all of this together, and for your great service to this county. We appreciate it. I also have got to give a shout out to Bruce and John. Bruce had to take off, but Senator Stevens and I, we sat right next to one another in the floor of the Senate for a good number of years, and he was just to the left of me, but never to the left of me. A true conservative representative of your county, and it was an honor to work with him. And John, it's always good to see you. Thank you for being here. And Benton County's pretty lucky. You guys got 2 congressmen. And it's always good to see Congressman Kustoff and to bump into him. It's an honor to work with him, to represent you guys up in Washington, D.C. Good to see you, David. I'll also want to give a shout out to the men over here who are sporting their bling. Got a little bling myself. I like to put it on every now and then. There'd be no vote at all. There would be no vote at all, man, woman, if it weren't for them. Let's give them a round of applause. I just got told, I guess we have a World War II veteran. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. Let's give this man. The greatest generation, for sure. And our awesome senator, I'm going to talk a little bit more about her because I get the privilege of introducing her, but Marsha, always good to see you on a podium, and anywhere I bump into you, I'll talk a little bit more about Marsha in just a moment. thank you all for being here today and for recognizing the importance of this moment. When Aunt Cord got up early one morning and walked down 100 years ago today to cast that vote, it's a pretty special moment in history for a lot of different reasons, but it tells us the importance of our freedom. And the biggest voice that we can make in our freedom, in our democracy, is the ability and the right and the responsibility to cast a vote. And it's a lesson that we need to hear today. Just a few weeks ago, there was a primary election to replace me in the Tennessee State Senate. And only 6% of the electorate went out and voted. We need to learn from Aunt Cord a few things. You can contrast that. When I was a veteran, I went over to Iraq a couple of times, and if you'll recall, when they got to vote for the first time, they dipped those fingers in that purple ink. 96% dodged IEDs and snipers to go cast their vote. We've got a lot we need to learn from Aunt Cord. And that is to be involved in the process of this great democracy. It takes work. You know, she got up early, and you think of all the years that it took to get to that point. And see these signs on the front row, the women who marched, the women who took on the opposition and pushed for that right that was justly theirs. Just like these men fought to give us that right. Those women stood and petitioned and wrote articles and knocked doors and in a way fought too for their right, for their vote to count. There's a lesson there for all of us. It's a huge lesson. Something else too that I think, and I'm trying to think back of what she was thinking as she got up that morning to go cast that vote. And there's something else that kind of comes to my mind, is that our state is the one that pushed that vote, that amendment over the threshold to allow women nationwide to vote. And she recognized that Tennessee was leading the nation then. And so she made sure that vote counted, because our state was leading then. And guess what? We need and are leading now. And it is critical for all of us to, in the spirit of Aunt Cord, make sure our voices are heard. And in the spirit of those women who marched, and of these men and women who have fought, to make our vote count. So the lessons, the celebration of today is what that woman and the many women who brought that about, the lessons they teach us. Freedom is not free. That vote is not free. It costs. And we all have a responsibility because of it, to give everything we can to make sure our voice is heard. It reminds me of a story. There was these two gentlemen walking to vote, and they recognized right away they were going to cast each other opposite votes. They knew one another, and they knew that if I vote, it's just going to cancel out the other guy's vote. So one of the gentlemen went up to the other and he said, you know what, let's just agree that both of us are going to cancel each other out, and we'll both just go home right now. And they agreed and said, okay, that's fine. The other gentleman went home, and someone overheard the exchange and came up to the one fellow who recommended it and said, you know, that was mighty gentlemanly of you. And he said, no, not really. That was the fifth guy today I've talked about like that. The point is our votes all matter. And like Aunt Cord, we have a responsibility to get up early, to learn who we're voting for, and to cast that vote. And I can't tell you of a vote I was more proud to make last fall than for the first woman senator for the great state of Tennessee. Not only am I following behind Marcia in this seat in Congress, it's interesting. She hails from a town about an hour from my house, Meridian, Mississippi. I grew up in Monticello, Mississippi. Marcia was a businesswoman who loved her country and got involved and built up the Republican Party in Williamson County, and then folks said, you know, you ought to run for state senate, so she did that. And in that job, she helped lead the fight to make sure that Tennessee didn't get an income tax. And she fought that battle and kept us from stepping into that huge and enormous trap. She then ran for the U.S. Congress, and in that role for, I believe, 16 years, right, Marcia, fought for the conservative ideals that have made this great state what it is today. To take that Tennessee leadership to Washington, D.C. Tennessee deserves conservative U.S. senators, and Marcia Blackburn has filled that slot. And now I am honored and proud to introduce to you Tennessee's first woman U.S. Senator, Marcia Blackburn.
Good morning. I tell you what, this is a glorious day, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you all. And so pleased that we have our veterans up here with us today, because it is because of their selflessness and their sacrifice that we are all able to peaceably assemble and celebrate having women achieve that right to vote, and Aunt Cord's participation in that. So we thank you all for that service. I will have to tell you, I was thrilled to know we have a World War II veteran. I have two grandsons. One is a Civil War buff. He's 9 years old. And the 10-year-old is a World War II buff and loves to meet everyone they can that knows about that time in history, and loves to celebrate those veterans who have given so very much. So we thank you for continuing that dedication to our country that you gave in uniform and then you give as a veteran. Last winter, during the winter, Mayor Beasley was in the office and said we were working on something that pertained to them, and he said, oh, by the way, there's going to be this celebration. I said, if there is any way I can be there, I'm going to be there. That sounds great. So we are just so excited, Mayor, for your commitment to making this happen and for giving us the opportunity. We say thank you. Well, Aunt Cord had to be one feisty woman to do what she did. And as we assemble here today, I want us to think about that day through her eyes and through her participation as a suffragist and her commitment to that. This is a group of women that displayed courage because they were going against the grain, determination because they were told repeatedly they didn't deserve to have the right to vote, and commitment because they never gave up. They kept the pressure on to make certain that they received the right to vote. And this legacy of Aunt Cord being known and now celebrated as a suffragist is quite remarkable, because in 1919 it was not celebrated, it was doubted that there was someone who deserved this right. There was doubt that women deserved the right to vote. And now we celebrate that these women who were visionaries fought through that and kept that commitment in place. And of course, what has transpired here is significant not only to our state's legacy, but to our nation's legacy and the way our nation moved forward with the 19th Amendment. I want you to think about this. These suffragists, And women like Aunt Cord were not only bucking centuries of law, they were bucking the trend of millennia of tradition. I want you to think about that. And it's because of the importance that our founding fathers placed on our government being organized as a government of, by, and for the people, that women were fighting for this right to vote. Now, this transpired 140 years after our nation's Constitution, that Declaration of Independence. And the path from Seneca Falls to Nashville, Seneca Falls, where Susan B. Anthony, for whom the 19th Amendment is named, where she and Frederick Douglass began this push. And then 72 years to where in Nashville, the 19th Amendment was ratified. And this group of women kept the pressure on for 72 years. Now, we've got all the mayors here. What if you had people for 72 years keeping the pressure on you every single day? And these women never left up because they wanted to be recognized and they wanted to have the right to vote, not only for themselves, but for future generations. Sue Shelton White, who was from Henderson, was one of our state's leading suffragists. Listen to this quote from her. "We must remember the past, hold fast to the present, and build for the future." If you stand in your accepted place today, it is because some woman had to fight yesterday. And isn't that still true? We should be ashamed to stand on ground won by women in the past without making an effort to honor them by winning a higher and wider field for the future. It is a debt we owe. And as we think about the passage of the 19th Amendment, as we think about the scene setting for that passage that took place here in Tennessee, each and every female here today, and every female elected official today, owes that debt of gratitude to Aunt Cord. Now, as we look at passage of the 19th Amendment, we have to realize that too often the enfranchisement of women, as we look back, people say, well, you knew that was going to happen. Well, sooner or later, that was going to happen. But that was not always the truth. As I said, it was a 72-year political battle. And on June 4th, 1919, is when the U.S. Congress passed out the 19th Amendment and sent it to the states for ratification. Now, by the time they got to the summer of 1920, 35 of 36 needed states had voted yes. So they were sitting at 35. 8 states had already voted no. And there were 5 states that were yet to vote. And as the suffragists looked at this, they thought, Tennessee is going to be our best hope, because the General Assembly the year before had voted limited suffrage. That is why Aunt Cord was able to vote in that local election. The General Assembly and the governor, in their wisdom, gave that right for local elections. But still, there was no federal amendment. And they needed 36 states. 35 had said yes, 8 had said no, and 5 were yet to vote. So that is why in the summer of 1920, all eyes came to Tennessee. Tennessee was the political battlefield. August 9th, the special session is called. Everyone goes to Nashville. Fist fights were breaking out right there in front of the Capitol, in the lobby of the Hermitage Hotel. They set up the War of the Roses. Those that were against suffrage wore red roses. Those that were for suffrage wore yellow roses. And the battle came down to the last day. It was a 48-48 tie. They were going to table this. And then Harry Byrne out of McMinn County got a telegram from his mother, who was a suffragist, and she was called Miss Febb. So Miss Febb sent Harry, her son, a state rep, a telegram and said, now be a good boy and help Miss Cat, Carrie Chapman Cat, who was leading the push for suffrage, help Miss Cat put the rat in ratification. He changed his vote. The final vote was 50-49. And Tennessee became the 36th state, and women received the right to vote nationwide. So in this, I hope that each of us takes inspiration. I hope that we are encouraged by the determination and the persistence that was shown by the suffragists, by women like Aunt Cord. And I hope that we each commit to preserving the right to vote for all Americans, and that we recognize the significance of what transpired with Aunt Cord's walk to cast her ballot and her desire to be first in line. Thank you all so much for letting me join you today.
You know, I have a feeling if, not that I want to add age to Senator Blackburn, but I have a feeling if she was around in 1919 that she would have been front and center on the suffrage movement, and we would be reading in the history books about her. But she's doing that same thing up in representing us in Congress, U.S. Senate. And what I want to say is, as a Benton Countyan, we have the cities of Big Sandy and Camden represented. We have our county legislative body, our county administrative body. We had our state representative, our state senator, both our congressmen, a U.S. senator. I'll read a proclamation from the governor who could not be here. As a Benton Countyan, I'm not sure that we could be so well represented on one day, and I think they all deserve a hand. Thank you. And again, I'll apologize in advance if any of our elected officials have to get on the road due to meet their earlier schedules and commitments that they have. We do understand. If you do stick around, we do have a lunch for you afterwards. So we'll move from our historical, political element over to the cultural history element of the program. And I'm going to be bringing up multiple historians who will tell us a little bit about how we got to this moment. At this time, I'm going to bring to the podium a man by the name of Mr. Bill Federer. Now, if you have not had the pleasure of meeting him personally, all you got to do is Google him. He has been on every level, spoken to every group. He ran for Congress himself. I guess if I had to sum him up, because his bio is very lengthy and accomplished, I would say he tells you everything about history that you wish you knew that you've never been told. I think that's the best way I could probably sum him up. And he publishes a daily email. And about 10 years ago, I began registering for this email. It's called The American Minute. And he'll send you out a daily email about the little twist of fate of history how one historical event here that seems inconsequential will lead up to another event that seems inconsequential, and to another, and then finally you get that aha moment of what elements of history and how they culminate and how they change our society today. He is the best there is at being able to sum that up in a readable format. Again, I encourage everyone to Google and register for his daily email called the American Minute. At this time, I'm going to bring up to the podium Mr. Bill Federer.
Thank you, Mayor Brett, Congressman Green. Well, if we back up and look at history, there are 6,000 years of recorded history from the beginning of Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley. Guess what the most common form of government is? Kings. Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Czars. Wherever there's a king, only one vote counts. The king. If he rules through fear, and if you don't do what he says, he kills you. Ancient Israel attempted to have a government without a king for 400 years until they demanded they wanted King Saul. The rubber band snapped back. Athens, about 600 BC, they had a democracy with about 600 citizens called landowners. The word citizen is Greek, it means co-king. So kings have subjects, republics have citizens. We pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. A republic is where the people are king ruling through their representative. So when we pledge allegiance to the flag, we're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves, right, under God. So Athens worked until Alexander the Great's dad bribed some citizens of Athens to betray their own city, and he took over. Rome was a republic with about 600 senators, and it went on until Julius Caesar found a way to usurp power and make himself dictator for life. Every attempt of people ruling themselves, the rubber band snaps back. Finally, you have King John in England, and his brother Richard's fighting the Third Crusade, and 25 barons surround King John on the fields of Runnymede in 1215 AD, force him to sign the Magna Carta. It limits the power of a king. Basically, it says if you pick on one of us, the other 24 barons will gang up on you. But this was taking that pie of a king and slicing it up. And then we have Virginia, was a king-run colony. It was a company colony first, but it went bankrupt. And so the king sent over a royal crown governor, but the king didn't pay him. And so he got this royal crown governor, got all the landowners together, they were called burgesses, and said, you guys have to figure out how you're going to cough up money and pay me taxes. And so it backdoored Virginia into the first legislative assembly, and the first people to vote in Virginia were these burgesses, and they were basically voting on who's going to pay what taxes. And then it went to anybody that owned a business, but the voting was who's going to pay the taxes. But we look at Massachusetts, and what happened was there were pastors and their little churches that founded communities. Now these were birthed out of the Reformation, and it was called the congregational form of church government. And this is what these New England pastors in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, in New Hampshire, in Connecticut, and they basically took their church model of everyone voting, their congregational church model, and then made it their community model. I mean, most of the church government meetings were in the church, in the choir loft. And this began the concept of citizens voting. And it began to spread. And then you had the, Calvin Coolidge says, now placing every man on a plane where he acknowledged no superiors, he must inevitably come up with a system of government where they got to choose their own leaders. Okay, we're all equal, but who's going to fix the potholes in the road? We got to divide up. And so the idea was that citizens were voting, but only those that could pay taxes and own property. But after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment, right, pushed through by the Republicans in Congress, gave rights to vote to the freed slaves. And then the 19th Amendment that we're celebrating today, an important step in letting citizens vote. Every person is a co-king. And then Nixon, of course, is the one who expanded it to the 18-year-olds. So what we're doing today, honoring people voting, honoring women getting a chance to vote, out of the 6,000 years of world history, this is really unique. And so thank you right here in Camden and in Benton County for standing up for this tremendous right and remembering Aunt Cord and the price that she paid to expand voting to women all across America and then across the world. Now I'm going to introduce Jackie Hillman, And Jackie is a West Tennessee native, and she's owner-designer of Reconfigured Art Jewelry. And among other things, she's the president of Sue Sheldon White Memorial Committee, which funded and dedicated a sculpture on Jackson City Hall Plaza to honor a renowned state suffragist, the first female attorney in Jackson, as part of the state's Women Suffrage Heritage Tourism Trail 2020. Jackie is also co-founder of the national award-winning Tennessee Women's Suffrage Heritage Trail, credited to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. She also serves on the Tennessee Women's Suffrage Monument Foundation, which raised $900,000 for the suffrage monument in Central Park. There's more in the brochure, but I do want to mention she was honored as the 2014 Sterling Award winner, 20 Most Influential Women in West Tennessee. Join with me in welcoming Jackie Hillman.
I would have shared with Senator that when they began debating the 19th Amendment, there were advertisements everywhere that said, come to a mass meeting at the Ryman Auditorium because the South is going to fail. If women get the right to vote, morality will be lost. And as a tribute to our senator, I would say, you show that we haven't lost our morality. You're a shining example of what can be done. But let me tell you about Sue Shelton White. She was an orphan, she was a stenographer, she was a lawyer, she was a suffragist, and clearly she was an activist. She lived from 1887 to 1943, and she grew up poor in Chester County. She was resilient, determined to support herself, and she was resolute in helping women and children. So yes, in front of Jackson City Hall, you'll find a granite base with a bronze sculpture on it of her, created by Jackson sculptor Wanda Stanfield. And the plaque reads, a West Tennessee woman who changed America. And that is so true. That's why we celebrate her today. If you vote in America, it is because of Sue Shelton White. She also helped write the Social Security Act and implement it, so if you get a Social Security check today, it is because of Sue Shelton White of Jackson, Tennessee, who grew up poor in Henderson. She was the second of 3 children born to James White and Mary Callista White. James was also a Methodist minister, but Mary was a staunch Baptist. In 1879, the church elder harassed James White, telling him he needed to get his wife under control and convert her to Methodism. Apparently, the argument grew heated, as religious topics are wont to do, and he slapped the church elder. So he got fired. He was expelled from the Methodist Episcopal Church and the ministry, and he lost his job as principal of the Jackson District High School in Montezuma, Tennessee. And they moved 6 miles away to Henderson to avoid all the scandal. But all was not lost. He served as a magistrate on the First County Court and worked as superintendent of the Chester County Schools in the 1880s. Yet, Sue White would tell you they grew up poor. She studied classics at home. She read William Shakespeare, Thomas Carlyle, Thomas Paine, Victor Hugo, and George Eliot, and she excelled in math and science. Then her father died in 1893, and her brother, Marshall White, went off to war in 1898. We cannot find any records of him now. Chances are he lost his life on a battlefield somewhere. So, Sue Shelton White learned how to chop the kindling, plant a garden, and take care of her mother. Mary White was highly educated, but she had trouble making ends meet, so she traded piano and voice lessons and writing lessons for food from the neighbors and help around the house. And she wrote articles for the local newspaper. Sue White later said of her mother, she fed our ambitions. I have never classed my mother as a feminist, but I suspect she was one. Life would have made her one in the long run if she had not been one in the beginning. She also said that her mother was unusual, sometimes troublesome, tolerated, and occasionally acclaimed. But in 1901, when Sue was 14, her mother died. She and her sister Lucy spent a small amount of time living with Aunt Sue White in Lebanon, and then they both entered Georgie Robertson Christian College, which you now know as Freed-Hardeman University, and they began teacher training and stenographic courses. She also graduated from the West Tennessee Business School in Dyer in 1905. She came to Jackson and went to work for Southern Engine and Boiler Works as a clerk. So she was writing catalogs and specifications. She told the owner that she felt she could do better if she took a correspondence course in mechanical engineering. And he patted her hand and said, "No, you need to understand a woman's fear. You don't need to know anything about engineering." 2 years later, she replaced her sister Lucy as a stenographer for the Tennessee Supreme Court, and she approached lawyers and judges and said, "I'd like to be a lawyer." And they said, "No, you are impractical and visionary." I've never thought of the term visionary as being denigrating, but clearly it might have been at that time. Yet she made important contacts with people who recognized her worth. U.S. Senator Kenneth E. McKellar, Governor Tom Rye, and the Tennessee Court of Appeals Judge Hugh Anderson. In late December 1912, Sue White and 30 other women from Jackson met at the Carnegie Library, and they organized the Jackson Equal Suffrage League, which joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association. And White was chosen to represent them at the state convention. She also met with women here. We're searching for those records now. We want to know, who did she talk to in Denton County about equal suffrage? She led the way in Jackson with her friend Mary Ellis Butler, and they revived Jackson's dormant 4th of July celebrations with parades, speeches, and essays. And she became the recording secretary for 5 years. But the group split because they argued over whether the next convention would be in Chattanooga or Nashville. So, it would appear that we could do something about arguing which city got the convention, but they had a bitter fight and they split. At the time, Sue White said it seemed terrible, but it was really not that unfortunate, because what happened was they became extreme rivals trying to outdo each other. And so in the long run, this aided the suffrage battle in Tennessee. As the 19th Amendment was being crafted and debated, White was among the National Woman's Party demonstrators, and she also headed up NAWS's 8th Congressional District in West Tennessee. Her campaign committee, now you think about a political organizer, Sue White organized 32 leagues, added 9,600 members, handed out 75,000 pieces of pro-suffrage literature, and she only spent $4,000, but I guess back then maybe that was a lot. She organized leagues in Tullahoma, Humboldt, Huntington, and Bolivar, and as I said, she came here and spoke. She and Lulu Reese of Memphis succeeded in getting the two groups that were fighting with each other to go back together. And then she was asked to register women for the war effort. She became chair of registration for Tennessee Women's Committee of the National Council of Defense, and that was in 1917. In 6 weeks, she had organized the states by counties to have a registration day on October 13th, 1917, and on that day, her team registered 50,000 women in one day. But she had to support herself, so she moved to Nashville. Governor Tom Rye had noticed how wonderful she was at organizing, and he appointed her the executive secretary for the Tennessee Commission for the Blind, which was new. So Sue White, being Sue White, she wanted blind people to have education. She wanted them to have jobs. She was highly progressive. But she left after a year because the other commissioners said, blind people don't need an education. They don't need schools. Meanwhile, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment had been revived, and women were marching in America. She joined the National Woman's Party, which was more radical, and that got her some criticism. but they believed you should work for women's suffrage even during the war, which was the point of contention. She became chairman of the National Women's Party because for her, suffrage was first. And then, on February 9th, 1919, she burned a cartoon or a photograph of Woodrow Wilson in a bonfire in front of the White House. It was bitterly cold. The snow was coming down, and I'll bet she couldn't feel her feet. And she probably tossed that picture into the fire with great gusto, for which she was arrested and spent 5 days in the workhouse, and was the only Tennessee suffragist to spend time in prison for her work. In August 1920, it all came down to Tennessee, the last state that could possibly ratify, as you heard our senator describe. The anti-suffrage leaders and the pro-suffrage leaders were all gathered at the Hermitage. The men had a room on the 8th floor called the Jack Daniels room because there was plenty of booze. Antis were spying on the pros by lurking in the hotel rooms, listening under the transoms to try to hear how they were getting the votes in. So the women shut the transoms, even though it was terribly hot. There was no air conditioning. Carrie Chapman Catt, the leader, was sitting in a tub of cold water in her underwear making phone calls for the vote, trying to stay cool. So Sue White and Anita Politzer decided they were going to park themselves down on the 8th floor underneath the transom at the Jack Daniels room and listen themselves. The Speaker of the House came out and told them they had to leave. They could not sit there and listen in. They refused. The hotel clerk then came and said, "Ladies, you need to leave," and they refused. So then the owner of the Hermitage Hotel came up there and grabbed them both by the arm, shoved them into an elevator, and pushed the down button. The next day, the vote began. And it was a true show of power. I want you to think about this. Speaker Seth Walker walked over to a young man named Banks Turner. He was a progressive young farmer from Yorkville in Gibson County. He put his hand on his shoulder. They were talking about bringing the amendment out of committee. If it never left the committee, it could not be voted on. And Seth Walker walked over to him when Banks Turner voted aye to bring it out, and he put his hand on his shoulder and stood there talking to him, saying, "You can't do this, you can't do this, you need to change your vote, you need to change it now." The pressure he was under was unbelievable. He shrugged the Speaker's hand off his shoulder, and he voted again to bring the amendment out of committee. So when you ask, why do we have a 19th Amendment? Yes, it's because of all these other efforts, but if this young farmer from Gibson County had not stayed the course, it would never have come out for a vote. Who was he? We don't know enough about him. He was a Vanderbilt graduate and a graduate of Andrew Jackson Law School. He was a Democratic representative from 1919 to 1923. He was a Presbyterian, a member of the Free and Accepted Masons, the Knight Templar, and the Scottish Rite. We do know that he was so annoyed at the Speaker for putting that pressure on him on the floor that he ran for Speaker in December 1920. Did he become Sue White's supporter and friend? Possibly. We don't know this. We're researching Sue White's papers now, and we're encouraging researchers in Gibson County to find out more. We want to do something to commemorate his bravery. Then it was time for the other votes to line up. It was close. It was so close. If I told you about all the political chicanery going on, it would take another hour, and I'm not going to do that because it's warming up. But there was a group of legislators that got on a train, a midnight train to Georgia, figuring if they skipped out on the vote, maybe it wouldn't happen. So they literally got on the train and fled to Georgia, but there were not enough of them, and so the vote happened anyway. Harry Byrne changed his vote because his mother told him to, and the yellow roses rained down upon the legislators from the balcony. Sue White's job was done. Tennessee passed the 19th Amendment. The amendment was sent by train at 3:30 a.m. in the morning to the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C., and he signed it in his study with the courier and his butler present. They didn't want any publicity. This was the largest nonviolent revolution in the country. And it was handled at 3:30 in the morning with the butler, the courier, and the Secretary of State. Sue White took a job as Secretary to United States Senator Kenneth McKellar of Tennessee, studied law, and was admitted to the bar in 23. She returned to Jackson in 1926 and established a practice with Judge Hugh Anderson, becoming the city's first female attorney. Now, Judge Anderson, you may know, was famous for the Nuremberg trials, but they were partners together for several years. And she actually lived with Judge Anderson and his wife in a little street at 208 North Fairground Street, which is 2 blocks from Lambeth. The house is still there. She also helped write Tennessee's Married Women's Property Act, the Widows Pension Act, and an Old Age Pension Act, which was the precursor to Social Security. She served as president of Jackson Area Business and Professional Women from 1929 to 1931, and I'm proud to stand here as president of Jackson Area Business and Professional Women today and talk about Sue Shelton White. She became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt and Molly Dewson, who was director of the Women's Division of the Democratic Party, and they invited her to Washington, where she wrote and helped implement the Social Security Act. Jack Tate, who was general counsel, called her the Lady Warrior because she never gave up. She died in 1943 of cancer. There's no telling how much more she might have done in her life, but we'll never know. She destroyed most of her personal letters before her death, but other documents are now in Jackson-Madison County Library, purchased for $3,000. There are also Senator McKellar's papers in the Memphis Library. And the Sue Shelton White sculpture in Jackson is now part of the Tennessee Woman Suffrage Heritage Trail across the state, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment in 2020. And I am so proud that you are doing this for Ann Ford, because you will be on the Tennessee Woman Suffrage Heritage Trail for your efforts. Attorney Bill Haltom of Memphis is writing a book on Joe Hanover, who led the West Tennessee delegation and the holding firm to pro-suffrage. Mr. Hanover was a young attorney. His family had immigrated from Poland, and he was shocked that his mother could not vote in America. And he kept together the West Tennessee delegation, kept their votes together. He ended up with stomach ulcers and living on crackers and water and lost 30 pounds, but he made it. And his family still lives in Memphis today. And we're excited about this book coming out on his history. And I'm writing a book on Sue Shelton White with a planned publication date for next year. And according to the New York Times, which ran an article just recently by Gail Collins, the main celebrations in the country are being planned in New York State and in Tennessee. You are going to be on national television in 2020. That's how important you are. So you know that Tennessee was called the Perfect 36 because we were the last state to ratify. In 2020, we want national attention focused here in Tennessee, and specifically in West Tennessee, where we had so many leaders who made this happen. And thank you again for having this celebration and being a part of this wonderful anniversary in 2020.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, one part of history, women have always been involved in leadership. Did you know that in 1500 BC there was a woman, Pharaoh of Egypt? Her name was Hatshepsut. Try saying that a few times. Then there was Deborah in the Bible, was a woman leader. And about the 3rd century AD, there was a queen, Zenobia of Syria. And she was so powerful, she almost defeated the Romans. And we're familiar with Queen Isabella, St. Columbus, and Queen Elizabeth in England, and Catherine the Great of Russia, and Queen Victoria. But as far as women voting, well, in the Middle Ages, there were abbeys and convents, which were enormous institutions. They were headed up by women. They were called abbesses, the head of the abbey. And the women voted along with all the princes in Europe. In America, there were some Iroquois Indian tribes, and there were women that were in leadership and owned land, and they would vote. Sacagawea went with Lewis and Clark, and in 1805 they were trying to decide where to set up their winter camp, and they let everyone vote, including Sacagawea, 1805. And then in New Jersey, around the Revolutionary War time, some women owned land and they got to vote. The Civil War. Did you know the military did not have hospital services? It was women that followed the army and took care of the poor and the wounded. Even at Valley Forge, 500 of the people that took care of the soldiers were women, and they died at Valley Forge along with the 2,000 men. And so we're familiar with women following the military. There were orders of nuns that did it. Matter of fact, the nurses got their nurse hat from the nun's hat. And Clara Barton started the Red Cross, the American Red Cross, and the Salvation Army and the nurses. But the enthusiasm of the Civil War was afterwards was funneled into the Prohibition temperance movement and the women's suffrage movement. And because the women had been so involved in the war, helping out, this enthusiasm carried over. And we're familiar with Julia Ward Howe, wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She was a women's suffrage leader. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Susan B. Anthony, who was arrested in 1872 for voting. And most of these women, when you read their speeches, they were pro-life. And well, then we have Eleanor Roosevelt, and was a woman leader in the United Nations, and she got to vote in the United Nations. But we have to remember there are countries today where women cannot vote. In Middle Eastern countries where they have Sharia law, and in communist countries where really nobody can vote. So voting is very, very special. And it's so special that right here we have the 100th anniversary of Aunt Cord voting. Well, the next speaker is Paula Casey. Paula spent 30 years educating on women's suffrage movement here in Tennessee. She produced a video in 1989 entitled Generation American Women Win the Vote. Also, she published a book, The Perfect 36, Tennessee Delivers Women's Suffrage. Much, much more. Join me in welcoming Paula Casey.
Thank you. What a great day to be in Benton County. And thank you to Mayor Lashley and the Benton County Genealogical Society for everything they have done to preserve this important history. And hi to Aunt Cord, thank you. It is so important that we remember the significance of her vote. People don't realize how long it took and how hard fought it was. And as Jackie mentioned, this was the greatest nonviolent revolution in the history of our country. The women who fought for the right to vote did not fire a single shot. And it's amazing to think that they were able to enfranchise nearly 27 million American women by the presidential election of 1920. It is so important that we remember how all of this evolved. And in Tennessee, we joined other states with limited suffrage. And this was all part of the great national suffrage leader, Carrie Chapman Catt's winning plan. She decided that if they could get the states to provide some form of access to the ballot, that would make it more likely that the federal legislators would support a federal amendment. And early on in the suffrage movement, which was 72 plus years, there was disagreement. There were those who wanted the states to do it and those who wanted the federal amendment. But what actually came out of that was that what the states give, the states can take away, and that was why they united and focused on ratification of the 19th Amendment. So Tennessee joined 11 other states in providing partial suffrage. And I think it's just great that we remember this remarkable story about Aunt Cord, an ordinary woman who did an extraordinary thing. And I want to tell you about what Jonathan Smith says in his book, Tennessee County History Series about Benton County. The first woman to ever cast her vote in any political election in Tennessee was Mary Cordelia Hudson. She voted in the Camden municipal election on Tuesday, April 22nd, 1919, and reported that she had voted for the winner in the race for mayor, Allie B. Bowles, and for the slate of aldermen that ran with him. Cordelia Hudson was a strong-willed Camden matron, wife, and mother who firmly espoused the cause for women's rights. She pressed her interest by making sure that she was the first woman in line on that spring day to vote in Camden. Isn't that a great story? So we can be proud that West Tennesseans are really responsible for bringing voting rights for women to the forefront. This is a right that we take for granted, and that's the way it should be. After all the hard-fought efforts, once it becomes the norm, nobody questions it. And that's really a good thing. So Ann Cord really set the example for women being part of their government. She joined the suffrage movement in 1918 because she really believed in self-government and that women should be participants in self-government. It's such a great story to remember. And this was the precursor to the to the vote in Congress on June the 4th, 1919, which then sent the amendment to the states for ratification. And I want to point out here that no one gave these women anything. A lot of times you'll see these throwaway remarks that American women were given the right to vote as though it were bestowed by some benevolent entity. No, they fought and struggled and persevered and persisted for 72 years to win the right to vote. And the fact that it came down to Tennessee, the last state that could possibly ratify, is a moment in history of which we can be so proud. And we are celebrating, starting with this recognition and celebration with Ann Cord. June the 4th, 1919, we'll celebrate 100 years since it passed Congress and came to the states. And Tennessee ended up being the last state that could possibly ratify because the suffragists, and they were suffragists, the British were the suffragists, they were so well organized. They had women all across the state, like Ann Cord, who believed in the right to vote. And the fact that we can vote today and not think anything about it, and we need to encourage everyone to cast their vote because democracy is not a spectator sport. It is so important that we educate young people especially that that vote was hard fought, that those women who fought for the right to vote played the long game. They knew, many of them in the first two generations of women who were fighting for the right to vote knew that they would not live to cast a vote. This is what makes Ann Cord so exceptional. She knew, she was born in 1851, and she knew that when Tennessee passed limited suffrage in April of 1919, and the governor signed it into law, Governor A.H. Roberts, who followed the great Governor Tom C. Rye from here, who was a strong supporter of women's suffrage. She knew that she would be able to cast that vote, and she did it. She didn't take it lightly. She prized her right to vote. Congress passed the amendment June the 4th, 1919, and sent it to the states. 35 states ratified, 9 states rejected it, 3 states wouldn't even consider it, and it fell to Tennessee with a well-organized army of suffragists. And I want you to keep one name in mind, and remember this name, or 2 actually. Representative Joseph Hanover from Memphis was a Polish immigrant who ran for the legislature from Memphis so he could vote for voting rights for women. He was appalled that his mother, an educated woman, could not vote. Joe Hanover was a hero. Banks Turner, as Jackie pointed out, from Gibson County, was a hero. Sue Shelton White from Henderson and Jackson was a heroine. These West Tennesseans are really the reason that it passed in Nashville. Memphis sent a united Shelby County delegation to the General Assembly to introduce the 19th Amendment. And unfortunately, Ann Cord died before the presidential election in 1920, but it is so important that we remember her today, and we remember our democracy and this nonviolent revolution. We have the right to vote. We need to celebrate it. We need to educate young people to exercise it. This is how our constitutional republic works. We need to be grateful for all those people who came before us and made it possible for us to gather here today. I'm a former newspaper journalist, and I will tell you that I don't think the 19th Amendment would have happened in this country without the First Amendment. and we need to celebrate the First Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the peaceful revolution that transformed this country. We have so much to be grateful for. Thank you again, Mayor Lashley and his staff, and all of you. Thank you.
Well, you know, before this event, I had not really anticipated admitting women do things better than men. But when you hear about 72 years of this commitment and this courage, being able to have a revolution, a nonviolent revolution, all of this determination, and especially since my mother's sitting on the front row, I'm just going to have to admit that women are just better at things than men are, okay? So, also I may have an election coming up one day, so you know, y'all remember that. Thank you very much for the history lessons. We need to learn history so we don't repeat it. But there's always a story of how we got from point A to point B to point C, and I thought they did an excellent job of being able to wrap it all up, show you how Aunt Cord's vote was really a vote for many, not just a single vote. And thank you again very much for your commentary. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to Mayor Autumn Rattler, who has the distinction of being the first woman mayor elected in the city of Big Sandy. And she's going to give us a little bit of local history for Benton Countyans as well as the city of Camden and Big Sandy. Autumn, I'll yield the podium to you.
And I'm pretty sure youngest, but who's counting? Good afternoon. At least we're all going to have a great tan after we leave here. I'm going to honor some women first of Benton County. If you're present in the audience, please stand so we can honor you. All right, first, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson, first woman to vote in an election in the state of Tennessee. Mildred Jolly Lashley, first woman elected to Tennessee State Senator to a full term. Autumn Ratliff, elected mayor, city of Big Sandy. Mary Wagner, appointed mayor, city of Camden. Sherry Beasley, Benton County trustee. Claudine Bray, Benton County Register of Deeds. Linda Armstrong, Benton County Tax Assessor. Blondale Cochran, Benton County Court Clerk. Mar Steinbuck, Benton County Commissioner. Marie Simmon, African American Women, Benton County Commissioner. Kalia Dye, youngest elected Benton County Commissioner. Betty Jo Douglas, Superintendent of Schools. Ruby Evans, Board of Education Commissioner. Jennifer Hedge, City of Camden Judge. Notable women of the state of Tennessee, Senator Marsha Blackburn, first woman to be elected U.S. Senator in 2018. The late Honorable Jane S. Kine, first woman elected statewide in 1980, which was 6 years after ratification. Representative Beth Harwell, first woman to be elected House Speaker in 2011. The late Representative Lois D. Berry, first female Speaker pro tempore and longest serving House member at her death in 2013. The late Senator Annabelle Clement O'Brien, first woman elected to both chambers of Tennessee legislature. And I want to end with a quote. It's, I see a young lady up in the audience. I dream to be mayor. since I was 8 years old. So it is young women with dreams become strong women with vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Ratliff. I guess one was Marilyn Lloyd. I believe she was a congressman out of Chattanooga. Well, it might have been the first woman woman in the state of Tennessee, and I guess the list wasn't long enough to accommodate everyone, but I want to definitely make a mention for her as well. At this time, we get to the closing, and I just want to take, on behalf of Benton County, Tennessee, thank everyone for getting to this moment of celebrating a lot of Benton County history, but also a lot of Tennessee history and a lot of national history at the same time. So as a closing moment, I would like to invite anyone who is a relative, member of the Beasley or Hudson family up here to the podium at this time. Governor Lee sends his regrets earlier to me that he could not be here to present this in person, but his office has prepared a proclamation, and we have more copies along the way. Of course, we won't have one for everyone today. However, you'll just give me your email. We can get you the hard copies ordered. But on behalf of the Governor of Tennessee, I would like to read this proclamation in thanks to your family member, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson, who made this moment possible. And again, she just didn't represent herself and her one vote. I believe she represented the city of Camden, a citizen of Benton County, the state of Tennessee, and a proud United States citizen. And I know as a Beasley or Hudson family member, I know that this has to be a very proud moment for the family as well. We've been planning it a little bit. I wish we could have maybe had a little cloud cover for you, but other than that, y'all are what made this day possible. It is an appreciation for what your family has done for this county. And so on behalf of the Governor of Tennessee, I'd like to read this proclamation. State of Tennessee proclamation by the Governor. Whereas on April 5th, 1919, the Tennessee General Assembly passed a bill that permitted a limited right to women, for women, to vote in certain elections. This statute coming into effect upon the signature of Governor Albert H. Roberts on April 17, 1919. And whereas on April 22nd, 1919, Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson of Benton County became the first woman to legally cast a vote in a Tennessee election. And whereas Miss Hudson self-disclosed that her vote in the local race was cast for the winner, Mayor A.V. Bowles, a statement was reportedly a point of pride for the mayor. And whereas just over a year later, on April 18, 1919, Tennessee became the deciding state to ratify the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And whereas regrettably, Miss Hudson passed away on October 1st, 1920, and was thus unable to vote in the first presidential election after the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And whereas residents of Benton County and surrounding areas will gather on April 22nd, 2019 to celebrate and honor the role that Miss Hudson and their county played in the history of women's suffrage. Now therefore, I, Bill Lee, Governor of the state of Tennessee, do hereby proclaim April 22nd, 2019 as the 100th anniversary of Mary Cordelia Beasley Hudson's historic vote, and encourage all citizens of Tennessee to join me in this worthy observance. Thank you. So Mayor Beasley, I want to present to you Mayor B.W. Beasley from Milan, Tennessee. I'll let him speak on behalf of the family.
just what you want to hear another politician, right? No, on behalf of the Beasley family and all the direct descendants of Ottencord, we want to thank you for this honor. And just a reminder what Congressman Green said, her walk represents the right and responsibility we all have as citizens of this country. So make sure you encourage everyone to vote. Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes our event today. I would like to also make a special thanks to the Planning Committee who made this possible, members of the Benton County Genealogical Society, the Chamber of Commerce, relatives and family members, as well as county and city government, all coming together to plan this day on behalf of Benton County and the city of Camden. I want to thank them for their hard work and efforts in making this a class act. Again, to our reenactor, Miss Julie Hessen, for playing Aunt Cord. I think she does a fantastic job. And again, we'll have a wreath laying ceremony at the cemetery beginning somewhere around 2 o'clock. We'll have an honor guard wreath laying ceremony, and we're going to also cast a bronze marker onto her grave. So we encourage anyone to, if you're still around about 2 o'clock, to join us there. At 12 o'clock or immediately following this, the Benton County Library will host a public reception. They'll have all the refreshments and drinks for you. Mr. Federer will also have a table of his books set up over there as well to show a little bit of part of what he does with the history of this country. For our invited guests and out-of-town guests, we also have a luncheon reception for you over at the First Methodist Church and have you join us. But if you're still around and the heat doesn't run you off, at 2 o'clock, we welcome all of you out at the Camden Cemetery. So on behalf of Benton County government and I guess the city of Camden, I would adjourn this session. Thank you for coming.